-3 is really hard to overcome. You have to be very optimistic about what's going to happen in the future, and the numbers we have so far for Q2 aren't that great.
We don't get too excited when these individual reports surprise on the upside, and we don't get too exercised when they surprise on the downside. Obviously, in this case, the latter is true.
The economy continues to struggle. The president has no plan for economic growth and won't push his party to act on the good ideas that we've passed in a bipartisan fashion here in the House.
We have to remember that we lost millions of jobs then, and we added hundreds of thousands of jobs this time.
A couple of things, Charles. One is a lot of people are looking at the market saying they reacted positively because the Fed is now not going to turn off the spigot fast enough, and that's something the market likes to see. And two, after a recession, a great recession as we had, traditionally, recoveries have been more booming.
In fact, the recovery from the Reagan recession of 81, 82 was remarkable. They went up to 6–7% growth. It was a very big snapback, and it gave us about a quarter century of almost uninterrupted growth. This is a historically weak recession. The administration can come up with all the excuses it wants, or the weather. As if you never have bad weather in winter. In the first term, the administration would blame everything on Bush, and now it's on climate. If we keep up global warming in these winters, we're going to freeze to death in the Northeast. This is obviously a result of an administration, 5 years of policy, which are high taxation, high regulation, high spending, and high debt. When you think of, as Steve talked about, the implicit taxes and the regulation and the unseen stopping of economic activity as a result of the overregulation, the uncertainty of Obamacare, we're getting that also in energy. We have this fantastic bonanza from fracking of oil and gas. The EPA is doing everything it can to retard it. The Keystone Pipeline is only one example of that. You simply have to unleash the American economy, and we would have a normal recovery. But that is something that Democrats are unwilling to acknowledge.
I have said it a million times, I'll say it again, it's a slow recovery, but I just think we have to be very clear that it is a recovery. We're not heading back into a recession, at least according to most economists.
Last word.
But when you're hovering at 2%, and therefore having a lot of trouble creating jobs, have a whole generation of young people who can't get them, then you're always hovering near negative growth. And if you have -3 in one quarter, that means that even if we have a +3 in the second, we will have 0 net for the first half of the year.
I've got a pen to take executive actions where Congress won't, and I've got a telephone to rally folks around the country on this mission.
We have a system of government outlined in our Constitution with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and the judicial branch. Congress has its job to do, and so does the president. And when there's conflicts like this between the legislative branch and the administrative branch, it's, in my view, our responsibility to stand up for this institution in which we serve.
There is a solid legal rationale for each of these steps that the president has taken.
Speaker of the House John Boehner saying today the House will sue President Obama for exceeding his executive authority. It's important to point out on executive orders the breakdown here of presidents, the number of executive orders specifically signed, and you see it in President Clinton, 364, George W. Bush, 291, and President Obama so far, 182, the total number of executive orders signed. We're back with the panel. Charles, Democrats point to those numbers and say, look at the numbers.
It's a completely irrelevant statistic. What matters is the breadth and the scope of each of these executive orders. Obama has essentially rewritten the laws on immigration, on drugs, and then he rewrites his own Affordable Care Act after it passes. You cannot do this. I mean, the Constitution says the laws are passed by Congress have to be carried out by the executive. Everybody knows what Obama did with the employer mandate, with individually canceled plans, with deadlines that he decrees just on his own are going to be postponed. It's called implementation latitude. That's not what's going on here. He's essentially having a blank slate. He's writing his laws. On immigration, The Congress was asked in 2006 whether it wanted to do the DREAM Act, which is to say that people brought here as children will not be deported. The Congress said no. Obama essentially enacted it by ordering the ICE, the Immigration Service, not to deport young people. That's a contradiction of how the system works. And with the drug laws, the administration has ordered prosecutors not to prosecute certain drug laws. Well, that's fine. If we agree on that, we should have a debate in Congress and we pass it. The policy issue, it could be a good one, but you cannot do it unilaterally, which is why it's a good thing what the House is doing. There might be a way, and it has a novel theory here on how it can get standing in the courts. The reason it hasn't gotten redress is because the courts have said Congress has no standing. This perhaps is a way to get it.
About signing statements. For example, President Bush had signing statements. Vice President Cheney spoke very often about executive power.
Well, here's the counter-argument. In foreign affairs and the conduct of war, there's been a constant tug-of-war between the executive and the Congress for 250 years because it's ambiguous. It's hard to see where Congress's power stops, the executive starts. And this is a struggle. For instance, the War Powers Act has been on the books 40 years. There's not one president who's ever accepted it as real law. Some have adhered to it nonetheless. So in that area, there is an argument, and you often get executives reaching, or you might say overreaching. But on domestic law, there is no ambiguity. You pass a law, you can't amend it after it passed. And that's why I think the usurpations of this administration are so obviously egregious, and why the frustration of Republicans, and I would say principled liberals like Jonathan Turley, who talks about an Uber presidency, are so important. You have to put a stop to that, or the Congress becomes totally irrelevant.
You didn't know this, but you teed up a soundbite for me. Jonathan Turley.
We have a system that's designed for 3 branches, but we now have a 4th branch in the form of federal agencies. Those agencies are now exercising judicial, executive, and legislative power that are becoming a government unto themselves. I happen to agree with many things these agencies do, but as a constitutional scholar, it worries me. It is a dangerous thing to have the emergence of a 4th branch in a system built for 3. And most of that power is being taken from Congress.
That's why I get the big bucks.
Yeah.
This has been a Sunfish production.